Back to the program. I'm joined now by the Victorian Senator James Paterson, live from Melbourne. Thanks very much for your company.
My pleasure, Peter.
Nice to see you living what you preach when it comes to penalty rates, and this being a public holiday on a Monday. You're at work in a sense.
Naturally, always.
All right, that's why I was surprised to see Sam Dastyari here before, but there you go. Look, I want to ask you though about this news poll, the aggregated results that we see splashed across the front page of the Australian. Now, these are in a sense the best material that we've got to go on because they remove error margins and they're done over a 3-month period. They show that the Liberal Party's got problems in your home state of Victoria. It's got even bigger problems in Western Australia and in Queensland. It looks like even though you're ahead on the two-party preferred vote, 51-49 nationally, that's not good enough because you're losing it where it counts, where some of your most marginal seats are. What are you going to do about it?
Well, I think these polls need to be taken in a little bit of context, Peter. They're being compared against our 2013 federal election result, which in a sense is the high watermark for the Liberal Party in many ways. We had just been through 6 years of disastrous, dysfunctional, very unpopular federal Labor government under Gillard and Rudd. We were running against a very unpopular carbon tax, a disastrous border protection policy. It's no surprise that anything compared to that result is not going to look quite as rosy, but even these results do predict the coalition to win the next election and retain enough seats to remain in government.
Well, I'm not so sure about that, actually, James Paterson. I mean, I know 51-49 would suggest that, but tell that to Kim Beazley. He won 51.1% of the vote in 1998 and didn't get over the line. It's where you win the vote that counts. And when I look at these numbers, Western Australia, you are down 5.5% on your result from the last election. That would see you lose a few seats like Hasluck as well as Cowan. When I looked at Queensland, you're down 6%. There's a number of marginal seats there. And you're ahead in South Australia. That's got to please you. But then again, Nick Xenophon is in the mix now in South Australia, and that is going to cause its own problems for coalition-held seats. I would argue that this would be a very disturbing set of figures for Liberal strategists.
Well, the government should certainly not take anything for granted. We have to earn every vote in every seat at the upcoming election in order to be re-elected. But I say again, even if these results were played out, the government would retain a majority at the next election, even with these results, which, as you say, may not be the most encouraging results possible. We would still have a majority. I hope, as we get closer to the election and the Australian people really contemplate, do they want Bill Shorten to be Prime Minister or do they want Malcolm Turnbull to be Prime Minister? I think that's a very favourable comparison for the Liberal Party, and I think you'll see that the polls trend back towards us and you'll see the government, in my hope, return with a reasonable majority.
Should Arthur Sinodinos resign?
No. I've the highest regard for Arthur Sinodinos, and I have seen absolutely no evidence whatsoever so far that there is any need for him to resign. All I have seen is conjecture. Not even something that would amount to an allegation, let alone a finding, and as he said, and his lawyers said, some pretty loose language from the Electoral Commission. That is not sufficient for a minister to step down.
Which is the more dysfunctional division, New South Wales, where we've got these third-party donations that have been exposed in ICAC, or your home state of Victoria, where over $1 million was siphoned out of the campaign? I think I don't have to throw the word allegedly in now, it's been accepted via a former state director.
That's a pretty tough question to answer. No doubt that there are some issues here, and the Liberal Party, as a Prime Minister and the New South Wales Premier has said, must comply with the relevant electoral law here, and I hope and I expect that they'll do so.
But what's going on? I mean, I understand and I support the Liberal Party's position on the ABCC and wanting to stamp out union corruption, particularly in the construction sector. But what about the pot and the kettle getting together? I support it when it comes to the union movement, but what about the Liberal Party, the party that you're an elected senator of, with the shenanigans and the problems going on in these two state divisions, the two biggest state divisions in the country?
Well, Peter, I don't think there's anywhere near the kind of systemic abuse and corruption that we've seen in the building industry, which warrants the return of the ABCC.
But I've got to jump in there, Senator. How would we know? How would we know? I mean, this is the point. We've had a Royal Commission into the construction sector and the union movement, and hear to that. Your side want to bring back the ABCC legislation. I say hear to that. But we haven't had anything resembling a Royal Commission look into some of what may or may not be going on in the Liberal Party. Is this just the tip of the iceberg?
Peter, you have to be the first person to call for a Royal Commission into the Liberal Party. Even the looniest wing of the Greens hasn't called for a Royal Commission into the Liberal Party.
Well,
There's no
why
evidence
not?
that there
We've
is any
got
need
over
for
$1
that.
million being taken out of your division. We've got illegal transfers of donations, it seems, from prohibited donors out of the New South Wales division. We've got people like my esteemed colleague here at Sky News, Ross Cameron, being suspended from the Liberal Party in New South Wales. Why not a bit of a closer look?
Well, Peter, I don't think any of those things rise to the level of abuse, intimidation and illegality we've seen on building sites and in union workplaces and from union officials. The Victorian Liberal Party, I think, has dealt admirably well with a serious problem. They've been very decisive, they've been very swift. When these allegations came to light, it was the Victorian Liberal Party that called the police in. You don't see too many union leaders doing that. In fact, that's one of the concerning things from the Royal Commission, is that have a culture of cover-up when the corruption is uncovered. That's the complete opposite in the Liberal Party. They fessed up, they took it to the police, they have cooperated with the police every step of the way, and it is the Liberal Party which has lost money, not the public. We have fully reimbursed taxpayers for any loss that they might have been exposed to as a result of Damien Mantak's behaviour as State Director. That's exactly the kind of good culture you want to have when these things are uncovered. I don't think anyone could say that culture exists in the union movement today. Peter
Costello is saying hands off our super. It's been referred to off the front page of the Australian in the Business Review section. Is he right? Because it does look like there could be some super adjustments in the budget from what we hear.
Well, we'll have to see what's in the budget, Peter, but I can say that my view is that we should tread very carefully in the area of superannuation for two reasons. One is that people who are approaching retirement have planned their retirement based on the existing settings in the system, and they don't have much opportunity to recalibrate their plans when they're so close to retirement. So we should be careful for those people. But for my generation and those below me, every time the political class makes a change to the superannuation system, it undermines our confidence in the system. They won't know at what tax rate they'll be able to withdraw their super, at what age they'll be able to get it out, under what conditions they'll be able to withdraw it. So every change that we do make does undermine confidence in the system. So my view is that we should be treading very carefully here. I'm not saying that there is absolutely no changes cannot take place, but I'm just saying that generally speaking, we should be very cautious here.
Do you concur with my sentiment about this? I mean, you probably don't agree with compulsory superannuation, which Paul Keating was the one that brought in, but put that to one side. When he brought that in, the problem that I have is that he changed the taxation arrangements. It used to be that you would be not so heavily taxed on the way in, but then be taxed as though it was the equivalent of income on the way out. He reversed that. The problem now is, if you want to move back to a model like that, you've got this gaping hole fiscally in the middle, because you can't be retrospective, in fairness to people. Labor's doing a little bit of that with what they're putting forward. I don't think you should be retrospective on that. But by the same token, if you don't make the change, then you are disincentivising people to save into super because you're taxing it on the way in.
Well, I think people who do save and invest and take care of themselves in their retirement deserve to be rewarded for that and not punished for it. They are taking themselves out of the state system. They will not be a burden to the budget in the future. So everything in super should be geared towards rewarding people who are able to do that, because we know from successive intergenerational reports, including the last one, that a very high proportion of Australians will still be relying on the pension in the future, even those who have had superannuation for most of their working lives. That's a worrying statistic. So my view is that we should make sure that superannuation is able to cover as much of a person's retirement as possible, and that people who have planned and done for that should be rewarded for doing so.
I enjoyed reading your very frank and fearless maiden speech, and in that tenor, let me ask this question. If you were the Prime Minister and you decided to shift the budget date, do you reckon you'd tell the Treasurer?
Well, Peter, happily as a senator, I don't suffer that particular delusion. I don't have any aspiration or expectation of being Prime Minister.
We've seen senators move to the lower house before.
Shoes, and I don't have to make those decisions. I've seen the press commentary that you have, Peter, and it seems from that press commentary that all senior figures in the government were aware that this was an option, and that, as appropriate, a phone hookup of the Cabinet took place on Monday morning to make the final decision that it was going to happen.
And last week in the evening, I saw the Prime Minister at the Opera, Turandot. Shouldn't he be out campaigning in marginal seats?
Oh, Peter, I don't think we can begrudge a Prime Minister engaging in a bit of art, a bit of culture. I think that's a very healthy thing. I'm sure many Australian people would be comforted to know that he's taken an interest in such pursuits.
Well diplomatically put, Senator. Okay, let me ask you this, hard-edged questions. The budget is going to be a tough budget for the government. Should this be a budget that targets bringing down debt? And if so, how do you manage the politics of that in an election year?
Well, I think, Peter, when you have a substantial budget debt and deficit, as we do in Australia, that every budget should be focused on spending restraint to ensure that we do get closer to a budget surplus and we do begin to pay down the debt. I think the Australian people will reward a government that is prudent and sensible and conservative in this area. I don't think the Australian people are looking for election year bribes. I don't think they're looking for handouts. I think the era of auction politics where politicians attempt to outbid each other is well and truly over. And we've seen this actually very clearly, at least from our side, in education. Bill Shorten is promising to spend money he doesn't have on the education system when we already have an enormous budget deficit. And I think the coalition has been very responsible in saying that we are already spending record amounts of federal money on education. We'll continue to do so, but we're not going to irresponsibly increase it in the way that Bill Shorten is promising to without any capacity at all to pay for it.
You are, though, at risk of increasing allocations of funding for education and health to the states in the upcoming COAG meetings this week. That's been mooted already in the media. Would you be disappointed, putting your ideological cap on, would you be disappointed if the government capitulates on those two fronts and, in a sense, affects the budget bottom line by trying to buy off the states with a bit of extra funding in those areas?
Well, as you say, Peter, we are currently spending record levels on health and education, and we have committed to continue to do so, and in fact increase spending from where it is today in every financial year going forward. That's a great thing to do, and I'm glad that we're able to do that. We do also at the same time have to ensure that we're exercising very serious restraint on spending in other areas to ensure that that budget deficit begins to close and we get to a position where we can pay back our debt. That's critically important, and I'm sure that that's what the budget will reflect. How
do you justify, though, the fact that government debt has literally doubled since the government came to power? It's a pretty extraordinary figure. I get that there was baked-in spending that had to be removed. I get that the Senate was obstructionist in some respects to things that the government wanted to do, irrespective of whether you agree with the policies or not. But, how much bigger can debt get before this government has to take responsibility for the increase in debt on its watch?
Well, as you say, Peter, it's a mammoth task. It's not an easy thing to turn this around. It's like turning around an oil supertanker. You can't do a hard right turn too easily. It has to be done in a measured way, in a modest way.
Costello and Howard managed it.
Well, they certainly did do a heroic task of budget repair. They had a little bit easier Senate to deal with, I'm afraid. The Democrats who had held the balance of power were a bit more reasonable and willing to negotiate.
But is that all it is, Senator?
Crossbenchers have proven to be. Well, I think that is substantially what has what's happened here. There are a number of savings in previous budgets that have still not been passed by the Parliament because the Senate has refused to pass them, and there is a limited amount that
But do you really think it's just? I mean, I think that's affected this government's capacity to emulate the Howard Costello years in terms of their ability to pay down debt. But is it really a wholesome excuse? Because when you factor in inflation, they got handed a similarly difficult task when they came to power in '96 to what this coalition government got handed in 2013. Do you really think that the configuration of the Senate is the only thing that differentiates the two? Because the '96 team did it a hell of a lot better and easier, it seems, than the 2013 team have.
Well, I've got enormous respect and admiration for what happened in 1996 and what Peter Costello did as Treasurer. It was an incredible job, and all Liberals admire them for that. There are a number of circumstances which are different this time around, and one of them you alluded to in your comments before about a series of spending measures which were passed but had not yet begun to make its effect on the budget, which we are now seeing on the budget over the next few years, because the previous Labor government, in a sense, booby-trapped the budget with big spending increases that only took place after the forward estimates concluded. So we never saw the impact of that in their budgets, and they never had to deliver them or demonstrate how they were going to pay for them. That task has fallen to the coalition. It's not an easy task, as you know, but it's something that we're continuing to grapple with.
Senator, we appreciate you living what you preach and being here on this public holiday, Easter Monday. Thanks very much for your company. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, Peter. Thank you.